We have lots of news to cover in today's video, including some trade talk around teams like Toronto, Edmonton, and Montreal. Plus, we have a bunch of updates regarding some potential PTOs, including Tyson Barrie, as well as Mike Hoffman. Plus, we have some interesting comments that we learned from Brad Marchand today. Update on Thatcher Demko in Vancouver. And, of course, we got a huge signing in Edmonton to talk about with Draisaitl. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news, some trade talk to take a look at today. It's been a fairly interesting news cycle. I do think some of the news we learned today could have been announced last week, but I think it was kind of held back after the other news that we heard. Unfortunately, the tragic news regarding the Gaudreaus, it just made sense to wait, and give the hockey world a chance to kind of focus and breathe. And we did learn a few more things, things that are being done in terms to honor the Gaudreau brothers here. Columbus and Calgary both have massive tributes and vigils outside of their arenas right now. Apparently, GM Don Waddell of the Blue Jackets and select players are going to be speaking to the media tomorrow afternoon. I believe it's 1 o'clock. I believe like local time in Columbus, and that is going to be streamed on their YouTube. So you can check that out. And I think it's tomorrow as well that both teams are going to be doing like a candlelit vigil at each arena as well. So, so obviously, still the fundraiser for Matty Gaudreau is not far off now from $600,000. Every time I look at it, it's jumped tremendously. Yesterday, when we talked about it in the video, it was around $500,000. I think it was around 575 or something like that when I just last looked here shortly before hitting the record button. So certainly, nice to see everything that's still pouring through. We did see a statement from the family as well, this kind of indicating that they, as much as they may not have responded to everybody, that they're seeing and hearing all the messages from the entire world of hockey and everybody that's connected to them, and they very much appreciate everything, and certainly obviously having a tough time as we can only ever imagine. So the entire hockey world, of course, is still kind of grasping at this and trying to make sense of it all, and hopefully we'll have a chance to honor these fallen men here in the coming days. Some big news today out of Edmonton. The Draisaitl Extension is done, that's what I alluded to in the opener when I said some of this news I think might have been finalized a few days back, but they just kind of held off announcing it, which I do think from what we heard today that the Draisaitl Extension was probably mostly ready to be announced and agreed to towards the end of last week. But the Draisaitl Extension has been made official. 8 years, $14 million AAV. It's over $100 million, $112 million total. He gets a full no move clause. Pretty much the max amount of signing bonus is very front loaded. You couldn't ask for a better contract from the team and players perspective. I know some are concerned, just like the last time when Leon signed. A lot of people said, "Oh, that's way too much money," but he's been one of the best players in the league. He's been one of the best players in the world. I have no doubt that this is something that's a coordinated group effort. I know I've seen some people are still. They like to chirp the Oilers, especially Toronto fans like to, think about the idea of Connor McDavid playing with the Leafs here in the not too distant future when his contract with Edmonton comes up. I just don't see that happening. Based on comments that we've heard from Jeff Jackson before, I really think, this is much as, it's not really Connor's negotiation. I would not be one bit surprised that Leon would not want to do this without having some sort of verbal commitment and everything kind of lined up for McDavid to do the same as soon as he's eligible. Same goes for Bouchard. We've heard all the speculation about at least those three of them kind of wanting to be the core guys there. I've seen obviously lots of comparisons now to the core four of Toronto compared to Edmonton, because Toronto, of course, a lot of us have given the Leafs a lot of grief over the years about how much money they're spending on their top four players, and now the Edmonton Oilers are in a very similar boat. Obviously, like in Toronto, you've got Matthews making 13.25, Nylander re-signed for 11.5, Marner's making just shy of 11, and of course Tavares is making 11, whereas now you're going to have Leon going to 14, McDavid's likely going to go to 15 or more, maybe 15.5. I'm not sure how much he's going to go to. And then, of course, you've got Bouchard. He's not signed yet, but everybody's expecting around 10-ish. Maybe he comes in a little less. I'm not sure. And then you got Nurse, who really isn't a part of that conversation from a impact skill perspective, but contract-wise, he's the next highest paid player, and that contract will continue to be an issue for them down the road. And when you add it all up, that's a lot of money, right? The only difference here that I'll say is a couple of things. One, in Toronto, we don't know the long-term futures of Marner and Tavares yet. And in Edmonton, obviously, Bouchard and McDavid have not yet signed, but at this point, we're not expecting any changes or any ideas that they're going to leave. So I suspect that that's very much likely going to happen, very, very likely for that matter. So, in Toronto's case, Tavares, I think, has a decent chance of re-signing, but it's going to have to be far less money. And in Marner's case, we don't know. A lot of us expected a trade. It never happened. But there's also been pretty very, very quiet in contract extension talk. So we don't know what's going on there. But if Marner does, whether it's Toronto or somewhere else, if his next deal, I'm assuming he's going to want at least 12, 13 million. He's going to want more than Nylander. I think that's fair to say. More than Nylander and close to Matthews. That's what he's going to use for his comparison. So at the end of the day, they're going to have three players, right around 12, 13. Whereas the Oilers are going to have, McDavid probably around 15 or more, Draisaitl at 14, Bouchard around 10. So the Oilers are going to end up having a little bit more money invested than the Leafs. But the other thing you got to remember here is that the cap is obviously higher. So there's that. And the Oilers have had a lot more playoff success. So in all honesty, I think you can justify paying your players that more when they've won more. So it's not quite the same thing, but it's going to be very challenging for sure for the Edmonton Oilers to continue to surround these guys with adequate supporting cast talent to be able to win. So I think the Oilers really need to win in the next 1 to 2 years, or it's going to be very, very difficult, like the Leafs have had, in order to surround them with that sufficient talent. But overall, I love the contract for Draisaitl. I think he's worth every penny in my book. And if you look at comparison-wise to Matthews, if you factor in that the salary cap is going to go up another 5% next year when this contract kicks in, and then you look at where the cap was a year ago when Matthews did his contract extension, the percentages of the cap are almost identical. Leon is just the tiniest bit more, except he signed for 8 years and Matthews did not. He signed for half of that. So in my opinion, the Draisaitl contract is even more valuable because it's for that many more years. So all in all, I thought maybe after we've seen the Jarvis contract and the deferred money, maybe we'd see a similar structure here with one of the big names like Leon, but that did not come to be. So we'll see. Some news on some PTOs here today. Of course, Tyson Barrie, who had been linked to the Edmonton Oilers, is now reportedly going to training camp with the Calgary Flames on a PTO. Of course, the Flames are in a completely different scenario here than Edmonton, and I would suspect with Tyson Barrie in Calgary, he'll have an opportunity to maybe get a better role and maybe even make a little bit more money. I mean, the Flames, I think it's believed to be PTO. We don't think it's going to be like a for sure contract just yet. But some reports indicated it could be league minimum, and I've seen some suggest it could be a bit more than league minimum. So I think Tyson Barrie will get a chance to probably get a little bit more money out of Calgary, a little bit bigger role. You never know. Maybe he winds his way back to Edmonton by the trade deadline. Maybe he goes somewhere else to a playoff team. It's really difficult to say, but he's expected to go to the training camp with the Calgary Flames. And Arthur Staple, he's normally a New York writer, but he has linked as well NHL veteran forward Mike Hoffman to possibly going to a training camp in Detroit on a PTO. Now, Detroit's also been linked to Max Pacioretty. So I do wonder, they're obviously seriously looking at bringing one of these older veteran wingers who does have a history of scoring to camp on a PTO. A little bit surprising, to be honest. Given what they've got right now, to some degree, I wonder, are they concerned about not getting deals done for their guys like Raymond and Bergeron, because they're really not going to have a roster spot for them if everybody's signed and healthy. So, another aging player who struggled in recent years, I just don't know how that really helps them. But, at the end of the day, we'll see what happens. The Hoffman PTO has not confirmed here just yet. Some injury updates in Vancouver. Of course, we talked a lot about their goaltending and the fact that Thatcher Demko obviously was, at this point, is rumored to be missing training camp and probably not playing any preseason games, still having some issues with the knee that, of course, he ended up coming out of the playoffs last year. Didn't skate all summer, but apparently now there's been some progress that he has been able to get back on skates. At this point, the team hasn't really said much, and they're not really giving any timelines or expectations or anything on those along those lines. According to Ian McIntyre of Sportsnet, that update came from him. That he also says that they are looking, though, to still add a veteran netminder, and Kevin Lankinen is a name that we've seen surface before. It's still under consideration, as well as veteran netminder Antti Ranta. So Ranta and Lankinen getting serious consideration by the Canucks. I'm not sure what the offer would be on a contract, but clearly we've heard that Sheelops is having some inflammation of his knee as well. That was more likely to be resolved by training camp or thereabouts, so that he would be, a lot less likely to be in danger of missing games to start the year. Whereas with Demko, if he did miss wasn't able to play any preseason games and did miss a fair bit of camp, then you would have to expect that he probably wouldn't be available to start the NHL season. So clearly, if they feel like the goaltenders have improved enough and can play to start the year, then they may not bring anybody else in. It may not make sense, but we'll see what happens. At least he's on the ice. That's progress, but still has a long ways to go to be able to play. Major update in St. Louis. We talked a number of weeks back that there was a report that said that Torrey Krug was at risk of missing the entire season. The St. Louis Blues had put out a note saying that Krug was being evaluated, and if he needed surgery for his foot-ankle problem, that it was going to be a case of having the surgery, soon, and likely missing the entire NHL season. That has been confirmed. After undergoing ankle surgery, Torrey Krug will not be available to the St. Louis Blues for the duration of the 24-25 season. It's a big recovery. Obviously, a very delicate spot of the body. Needs a long time to heal. And, hopefully he can get back to playing and, get back to being what he used to be, because certainly you could tell that the issue he's been having certainly impacted his performance. I know that the Blues last year were trying to move him if they could. Hasn't really worked out. I do wonder how much the injuries played a role in that, but at this point, he'll miss this season, and we'll see where things go from there. But at least we know that for sure. So he'll be an LTIR candidate for St. Louis, who of course has invested a lot of other money into other players that we saw this offseason as well. Brad Marchand back in Boston, spoke to the media for the first time since the end of last year today, and certainly revealed some things that a lot of us were not aware of. A lot of times when the season ends and you hear the last availability, whether from the players or from the management group or the coaches, so you learn a lot about the injuries that we weren't told about, and kind of upcoming surgeries, things like that. There was nothing really mentioned around Brad Marchand, but Brad Marchand had not one, not two, but 3 separate procedures this offseason. I don't know, obviously how much it'll affect him. Obviously he would have missed some time training for sure, but at the same time, hopefully he's good to go and will be back to his normal self. But the 3 surgeries involved the groin, an elbow surgery, and an abdominal surgery. So clearly, Marchand was dealing with a lot more last year than we ever knew. That the elbow, I believe, was something that happened early on, and he dealt with for the majority of the season. Whereas the groin and abdomen issues that required surgery happened, later on into the season. So hopefully he's 100% ready to roll. Now on to some trade speculation around the NHL. Of course, we've heard a lot about Montreal. They were a hot topic all summer, and of course we finally saw the big trade involving Patrick Laine. Now yesterday we talked a bit about the idea of them maybe unloading a veteran player, because the Columbus Blue Jackets now find themselves in a predicament that they're under the salary cap. Of course, they had just moved the Laine contract to Montreal. Then, of course, we had the accident that took away Johnny Gaudreau. So when you take those 2 contracts off the books, now they're suddenly under the cap. Now, I mentioned I don't know if the NHL will, still enforce everything given the circumstances and how they got there, but lots of talk that they are going to have to end up acquiring a contract from somebody, and they can make it worth their while. Obviously, they can certainly make a team give them a sweetener, because they're in a predicament where they can weaponize their cap space, and maybe Montreal can be that team to help them out, at the same time help themselves out, because Montreal, even though they don't absolutely have to make a deal, they could benefit because they wouldn't necessarily need to use long-term injury reserve, and it could actually accrue cap space throughout the season if they were able to unload, at least one contract depending on the value of it. The Carey Price contract would not necessarily need to be used for long-term injury reserve. We talked about, some veterans like, whether it be a Josh Anderson, a Brendan Gallagher, a Yoel Armia, a Christian Dvorak, even a Jake Evans, because there was some thought that maybe Owen Beck might be ready enough and to push Evans and kind of take his spot. But if Jake Evans is moved, that's not going to be enough from a cap perspective to make them not need any LTIR with the Price contract. So it'd have to be more than that. That's why, like I said, the Anderson and Gallagher contracts are less likely because they have more term, as much as Montreal would probably love to move on from one of them. But Dvorak and Armia have a lot less term. It would be a lot easier move. So we talked about that being a real possibility. But today we learned as well from comments from Renaud Lavoie, who's a well-connected insider with TVA Sports. It was on BPM Media in Montreal, talking about a variety of things they looked at this offseason. He did confirm that the Habs were involved in a lot of trade talks. Some of this we already knew, some of this we heard as speculation, but it was not confirmed. Lavoie says they were definitely in on trade talks when it comes to players like Rutger McGroarty, Marty Necas, and of course Trevor Zegras. Obviously not mentioning Laine because we already know they were involved there because the deal went down. Of course, McGroarty has been traded to Pittsburgh. Necas ended up re-signing in Carolina. He refused a few trades because he wouldn't sign with them. The Zegras deal, we heard lots of speculation about Montreal being one of the teams that were interested, but it's just the first time I've seen an NHL insider absolutely confirm that they were in on those discussions and they were definitely interested in acquiring him. Of course, he goes on to say that after the Laine trade, maybe it's a little bit less likely now that they complete that or continue to push for it, but obviously with McGroarty and Necas being off the market, you have to wonder the connection there, of course, was Zegras to Cole Caulfield. The style of play might fit better with Montreal and all that, because we know Pat Verbeek and the Ducks, the big thing is they want him to be more of a 200-foot player. They want him to make some adjustments to his style of game, and it just sounds like there's a bit of a disconnect between the player and the organization, and I'm not convinced that he has a long-term future there in Anaheim. Now, whether or not it ends up in Montreal or somewhere else remains to be seen. It's difficult to say, but I do think that it does make some sense, but it's nice to see from an NHL insider that a lot of the speculation and rumors that we had seen over the course of the offseason did have some truth to them. They were very much involved, and obviously be curious to see if they do revisit that, and that's something that they continue to maybe push for. So if there's interest that was there before, it very well could be there again. Just because they picked up Laine doesn't mean they're necessarily done. So we'll see. In Toronto and Edmonton, could they be trade partners? I did see an article from the Hockey Writers and Jesse Corville talking about, from an Oilers perspective, if it made sense for them to maybe try to pick up Nick Robertson from the Toronto Maple Leafs. It might be an option for them to squeeze another young player into their lineup. They do have a little bit of space remaining, and you might be able to take advantage of a player that they can get to be another young, skilled winger to help them get a little bit younger, because they do have a lot of older players who's not making a ton of money, doesn't have a lot of leverage right now to demand much more, and at the same time, they could probably get for cheap. They suggest maybe offering like a third-round pick and maybe not necessarily their absolute top prospect, maybe a prospect like a Phil Kemp or something like that. So that might be enough to get the deal done. Or perhaps they consider, if Toronto was more interested in a veteran player instead of a prospect, maybe they offer up like a Derek Ryan or something along those lines. I would suspect if Toronto moves Robertson, they'd probably prefer, I guess maybe a player like Ryan makes sense, but I think they'd probably prefer another younger player coming back, like another prospect and a pick. You throw in like a prospect and a third rounder, that's probably, to me, with the value that Robertson would have, I don't know that you're going to get a whole lot more than that. But considering all the rumors we've heard around Toronto that Robertson has no desire to change his mind and to sign, and that they're looking at these different players for PTOs and whatnot, I don't think they're planning on and banking on Robertson being in training camp. And if he's not going to be there, there's a spot that's definitely, in my opinion, up for grabs. So, could Edmonton take advantage of that? I guess it's certainly possible. I don't know, looking at that Oilers roster, though, that there's a definite spot for him there. I would honestly think he might be better served by going to a weaker team, somebody who's more in a rebuild mode. But at the same time, if he could get a chance to play with some really good players, it might actually help him, kind of create a better role for himself and put up better production to get his, kind of foot in the door and be more established as a more regular NHL player, which is something that, so far he's somewhat struggled with so far in his young NHL career. So we'll see. Obviously, we know that Nick Robertson wants to be traded. We know that the Leafs at this point have not done it. We know that they don't seem to be too phased by it, listening to Brad Treliving, but I don't expect him to speak differently to the media. If he changes his tune, you don't want to lose any of your leverage, right? Because right now, I would say that the Leafs have the leverage. They have a roster that looks like there's a spot for him, and if he's not taking it, then they have every bit of leverage to go back to him and the agent and be like, listen, we have a spot for you to come play. We haven't found any deals that we're comfortable with. Why don't you just sign and come to training camp? And if he doesn't want to do that, they'll be like, well, we feel like there's a spot here for you. We're not really in a rush to move. You can sit out, and if he starts losing paychecks, it could get ugly, and it could really drag on. It could have a major impact on his opportunity to get into training camp or a lineup this year. So, like I said, numerous other situations that we've looked at around the NHL, there's no pressure point here just yet. But a couple more weeks when training camps are scheduled to start, if there's still no news on Robertson, he has not signed, has not been traded, then I would suspect things are going to ramp up. You're going to see more pressure from him and his agent to either sign, get traded, what have you. And we'll see. But the Edmonton Oilers could be a landing spot, but there's several other teams that make sense as well. Let me know what you think on this and all the other news we talked about in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.